Hello, creeps! Welcome to another episode of The Mortuary. I'm your host, Morbid Tuna, and this is where we talk about horror films and related geekery. On today's episode of The Mortuary, I'm going to be reviewing 2025's Wolfman, which I just watched last night. As you can tell by the title, this is ostensibly a remake of the 1941 classic The Wolfman with Lon Chaney Jr., although calling it a remake is perhaps not all that accurate. It's not telling the same story. It tells a similar story, but different enough that this is definitely its own film. This isn't just redoing the classic. There are some nods to the classic in this, little Easter eggs here and there, which I won't spoil. I'll let you guys see them yourselves. As always, though, there will be spoilers just below the video down there, so if you want to know, by all means go look, but don't complain if you looked after I've already warned you. I don't want to hear it. So, the basic story of this Wolfman film is a small family, mom, dad, and a little girl, head out into the woods to the dad's father's house out in the woods. This man has been officially declared dead by the state, set in the state of Oregon in the US. The state of Oregon has decided that this man must be dead by now because he's been missing for whatever the given period of time is. He's been gone, no trace of him, no contact from him. They figure he's dead. So the man, the woman, and the little girl go to this house out in the forest to tidy up, go through the guy's things, all that loose end tying up that one needs to do when a relative dies. However, it becomes clear that this is no ordinary missing person, now declared dead type of situation. Because sure enough, there's a monster in the woods. And it begins stalking the family. And they end up having to barricade themselves inside the house to protect themselves from whatever this creature is. I can't imagine what it could be. That seems intent upon killing them. And that plan would have worked quite well, except Dad gets injured defending the place. He gets injured by, you guessed it, a werewolf. And we all know what happens when someone gets injured by a werewolf. So poor Dad begins to exhibit some of those classic signs that we always see. First, his senses become more acute. He can hear things that the others can't. He can smell things that the others can't. And he begins to revert to this feral sort of a state. The interesting part with this werewolf is that instead of having these symptoms I just mentioned in human form, and then one night the full moon comes out and he transforms into a giant wolf or a mixture of man and beast and goes running around, and then the next morning he's fine again and doesn't remember anything and all that. Those tropes we've seen in werewolf films before are twisted slightly. It's a slow transformation. And it doesn't seem to depend upon the full moon or even nighttime. We see the creature operating in broad daylight, and we see this slow transformation as his features change and his behavior changes, and you can see him trying to resist what's happening to him, but of course it's a losing battle. I would liken that aspect of this film to the film Wolf from the mid-90s, starring Jack Nicholson and Michelle Pfeiffer, which I recommend also, by the way, where it's just this slow, inevitable transformation towards whatever the final product is going to be, whether he's going to be a full-on four-legged wolf or the upright mixture of man and wolf thing that runs around. But it has that aspect to it, which makes it a bit more interesting because there are tons of werewolf movies. We've all seen the werewolf movies before. We all have seen the cliches. So the challenge of creating an interesting new werewolf design is one that this film meets quite well. I haven't seen a werewolf designed quite like this one, nor has the transformation itself been given these parameters that I've just mentioned, except for in the film Wolf from the 90s. As always, if anyone has any examples of other werewolf films where the transformation is slow and gradual, by all means mention them in the comments. The sad truth of werewolf films is that, unlike some other horror subgenres where there are good ones, okay ones, and terrible ones. Really, with werewolf films, there are only good and terrible. There really isn't much middle ground there. And regrettably, more of them fall into the terrible category than the good category. For those of you interested, by the way, the ones that I would put in the good category that I would recommend are The Howling, Wolf, as I mentioned earlier, and the original Wolfman, although you must take it for what it is in its time. It's very tame by today's standards, but definitely a classic. And in fact, I also like the remake of The Wolfman, the actual remake from a few years ago, maybe 10 years ago now, I'm not sure, with Benicio del Toro and Anthony Hopkins. That one was decent. This one does fall into the good category. I wouldn't say excellent. It feels a little rushed sometimes. The pace is not quite as even as I would have liked. The allegory of lycanthropy being like intergenerational trauma is pretty obvious. A little heavy-handed at times, perhaps. Maybe the director thought people wouldn't get it, but this film definitely uses lycanthropy as an allegory for mental illness, abuse, the cycle of abuse, where one werewolf will create the next, and so on. As I said, it's a little heavy-handed in that area, but it definitely makes sure you don't miss the point. The scary aspect of it is quite well done. The jump scares are effectively used. They're not overused. The gore isn't excessive, but it's definitely there. And you really need some gore when you're dealing with a creature whose modus operandi is to just tear their victims to pieces. The acting, though, I can't quite put my finger on it, but maybe there was just a lack of chemistry between the actors. But at times, it wasn't pulling me in. It wasn't convincing me. Other times it did, but it wasn't consistent in that. There were scenes where I was just sort of like, okay, these are a bunch of actors saying their lines, maybe each one individually doing well, but they were missing that charisma that a bunch of actors who do have good screen chemistry will have, which will enhance the scene. That seemed to be missing sometimes. The film, as I said, also did seem to be in a bit of a hurry sometimes. He wanted to hurry up and show you how the werewolf looked. And then he wanted to hurry up and show you how they're dealing with it. And it did feel as though they were making the film looking at their watch every once in a while. But it's just my perception of it. Maybe other people will think that the pacing is just fine, but it didn't quite land that well with me. So, generally I would say this was a good werewolf film. Not excellent, but it was good. Interesting story, interesting creature design, some interesting innovations when it came to the creature, but pacing dodgy at times, acting generally good, but a few scenes where it was a little shaky. And the allegory of lycanthropy being like intergenerational trauma, also a little bit heavy-handed. So, overall, entertaining. Would I tell someone to go see it? I would tell you to rent it or stream it. It's not one you really need to go see in the cinema, but it's definitely a good evening's entertainment. So I would say, yeah, go ahead and see it, but don't expect it to be anything groundbreaking or brilliant. Therefore, I'm going to give Wolfman 3 dead tunas out of 5. Well, that's it for another episode of The Mortuary with Morbid Tuna. If you have enjoyed this video, by all means, click the like button, click the subscribe button, and tell all your horror-loving friends to come on by The Mortuary and listen to this weirdo talk about horror films and related geek horror stuff to their heart's content. Stay tuned for my next review, coming at you in a couple of weeks. Until then, this is Morbid Tuna at The Mortuary, saying, slash you later.